Hi, my name is Elena for Workplace Chronicles. Today is all about communicating value in our organizations. Our guest is Cordelia Anderson, who is a very popular marketing consultant, and she will be giving you an overview about marketing, providing very insightful tips, and answering all of the questions. And so get your tea, water, or whatever your for refreshments and listen in. If you have any suggestions about things that are really working for your organization, please put it into the comments thing so we can all benefit from your expertise. And as always, this is a free service from Acero. Please like and subscribe, and I will be back at the next one. Hello, we're going to get started. I'm making sure we are recording. Yes. And the caps are on. Yes. So, for everybody who doesn't know me, my name is Elena. I am over professional development for ACERO. ACERO is the Association of Southeastern Research Libraries. And for this year, for some of the other people who have participated, we've been doing like more personal, more comfortable conversations with people about a wide variety of topics. These are not structured PowerPoint, 1, 2, 3 kind of things, but just a chance to really interact with someone who's an expert in the field. The thing that I would like for you to do as we are talking, I've only wrote down a couple of questions. So if you think of questions over there on your right-hand side, that's where you can type in your question. Feel free to ask your question as soon as you think of it. That way that as I can see the questions, we can always pivot to make sure that you're getting whatever you need from this session available. The other thing to keep in mind is that we have the caps on, so you should be able to see the captions down at the bottom. You can also react in there in the reaction. That is great. And the following thing is that ACERO is committed to having complimentary webinars for all. So if you have any other webinar thoughts or anything, you can always reach out to me, Elena, for your webinar ideas. But if you want to sign up for anything that we have coming up in for April, and I think I even have something for May, you just want to go to our website at acero.org, go to the event section and sign up for your heart's content. Like I said, we're committed to making things complimentary so everybody can have access. Another question that I'll get already in the box that I'll tell you right up front is that this is being recorded. And then afterwards, I will put this onto our Acero YouTube page and feel free to watch it again or share it to anybody who would benefit. So without further ado, I'm going to take it to who you came to see, which is Cordelia. I just met her. I've been adoring her for actually a few years. I just think her content's lovely. And she reached out to me and I'm like, oh my gosh, I was going to reach out to you. And so I'm really excited that she is here today to talk all things marketing. And she also has a second book coming out, so keep in mind about that. And she's going to tell you a little bit about herself. And then we're going to talk a little bit about marketing because she has been doing marketing for years. She is the expert and she's been working with us as on a consultant basis also for years. And so I'm going to have Cordelia tell us a little bit about herself, and then we'll start with the first question.
Thank you. And yes, Elena is going to be quoted extensively in my book. So, all the more reason to check it out because I sought her out as an expert as well in what she does. So we're really excited to be able to talk with you all today. So yes, my name is Cordelia Anderson. I started working in libraries in the year 2000. I took a job with the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library that really changed my life. But actually, my relationship to libraries goes back even further than that, which I had completely forgotten until I went to revisit it for a project. But when I got out of graduate school, I kind of didn't know what I wanted to do. And somebody said, well, you should go to the library. So I went to my local public library, found a book that said communications companies in the US and sent my resume out to a bunch of them. And that's how I got my first job in marketing and communications was through a public library. So that's a fun little anecdote. But I started working at Charlotte Mecklenburg Library in the year 2000. Charlotte Mecklenburg is a large, since this obviously is Southeastern Libraries, you probably have heard of us. We're in the Charlotte, North Carolina area. It's a large library system that was known for doing a lot of innovative things. So I had a really great experience. I worked there twice on and off from the year 2000 to the year 2018. And during that time, I got to see a little bit of everything, not just the marketing side, but also the PR side of things, from the very fun, like big projects, big events, all kinds of cool things like the Daily Show filming out of one of our facilities, and then also the very not so good, like budget cuts and layoffs and branch closures. So we really ran the gamut. And I also was there during multiple strategic planning processes. And through that time, I had always understood sort of the what of marketing, but I went back and got my accreditation in public relations, and that really helped me to understand the why behind marketing and PR and why it's all about relationships and building relationships with your audiences in a variety of different ways. So I left that job in 2018. I was director of marketing and communications, and I started consulting. And so since then, I've been working with public libraries, academic libraries, library support organizations, and occasionally some nonprofits and government agencies just to really work on how do we tell our stories? How do we engage with more people? And in some cases, how do we get out of our own way? Because sometimes we as libraries, without realizing it, are creating the very obstacles that we're trying to overcome. So the more I get to work as a consultant and work with more different varied libraries, the more I get to kind of learn about some of the cool things that libraries are doing and also some of the commonalities and the struggles that we all face. So that's kind of my overview in a nutshell.
No, I think that's true. For somebody too that's done a lot of marketing workshops for libraries, I do find that sometimes we're getting in our own way. And just going back to the title of this talk, which is being conscientious, humble, busy. How do you see those library traits showing up in real world marketing challenges, especially in a
Mhm,
sense that we are busy? And number one thing that I hear all the time is that I do good work. We do really good
mhm,
projects. We do this, and people should naturally know that we're good. And all this extra, braggadocious things feels very, very uncomfortable. So, like, what do you say when someone tells you that we're doing good work, which we are? I'm a librarian as well,
mhm.
but is that people should automatically know that we're doing really good work?
Yeah, well, and the first thing I always do is really try to recognize where that comes from. Like it comes from a good place because among those shared characteristics that libraries have is that they're very conscientious. People who go into libraries tend to be very conscientious people, have high ethics and moral code and wanting to do good in the world. But also, kind of what goes with that is being very humble and even, like you said, maybe even uncomfortable about promoting themselves too much because then it might feel like you said braggadocious or something. And so that's something I really learned and it really came to me when I was giving a presentation once at an academic library at their staff meeting about telling your story and specifically gathering and telling stories of impact. And before I got up to talk, they were just doing their regular meeting business and they were giving an internal award to a librarian who'd done this like amazing work. He'd worked with the faculty to do research that helped them create a book and things like that. And when they went to give him his plaque, he looked like he just wanted to climb behind the chair and he kind of like very quickly went up, grabbed his plaque, and then very quickly sat down. And it suddenly clicked in my head like, oh, of course, he doesn't want the spotlight on him because he's doing the work that he does because he cares about it and he knows it's important, not because he wants praise, which I understand. But also, it's okay. Like, I try to help people understand it's okay to talk about what you do being important. And you really can't assume that people outside of libraries know. In fact, we all know better than anyone that people outside of libraries don't know all the great stuff that we do. If we're lucky, they know one really great thing that we do, and they come to us for that over and over again. But if we don't take the time to actually build those relationships with our audiences and help, you know, not just educate them over time, but really communicate, have that two-way conversation with them over time, they're not going to get past that very shallow level of knowledge about the library. So we have to get out of our own way and being humble isn't an excuse or a reason not to market ourselves. It's just too important. The stakes are too high.
No, no, I think that is very true because especially when you go to libraries that have had budget cuts are
Mhm.
in, things are being cut. And what I always say, which gets people to think, is that a lot of times when you ask people about, talk about the value of the things that you're doing, how do you normally communicate this? They go their annual report or something on the
Mhm.
website or whatever. And And I was there like their statistics, how many people have walked the door and those kinds of things. And
Mhm,
I said, okay, so what happens when um, your back's against the wall and you're
mhm,
about to be cut by 20, 30%? Let's take New York Public Library or somebody like that. Your back's against the wall. They're literally, you're going down in the ship. What do you normally do? They all say, oh, I bring in Susie and this one and that one to talk about all the things that we've been doing and this and that and the other. I said, yes, because the statistics and the data never kept
mhm,
them from cutting your budget. But the people who are physically in your library who are talking about the value of why it's there is usually what stops the cuts. I said, so why
mhm,
do we, after, we might get our budget restored or everything went back to normal, then we go back to the same thing that we did before, right? Like why can't we just incorporate the statistics,
mhm,
the data, and the stories together? Why did the stories only come out during all the, chips are down and we've got to figure it out. Like, how can we bridge the gap to do both? Like, data shouldn't be thrown out, but the story shouldn't be all 100%. But what do you usually get people to do, like in your consultant work, to see that
mhm,
to be married together? Yeah, because I always talk about that, and they're like, well, data is what we're comfortable with. But I'm like, it's the stories
mhm.
that keep you alive, right? And so, how can we do a little bit of both?
Yeah, absolutely. And we do need both because different stakeholders process information differently. So, for some stakeholders, the numbers are really important. For other stakeholders, the stories are going to resonate with them. But in both cases, I think the stories and the numbers complement each other. And so, when you ask like what I do, that's another thing that I think I noticed quite a while ago, even when I was still working in a library, is that we're always focused on what's coming up. And 9 times out of 10, that's programs. Programs are like the churn that drives library marketing, and programs are great, but they take up more than what makes proportionately they take up more than what makes sense of marketing's bandwidth because they're always changing. That's why I call it the churn because there's always another one. You finish promoting one, there's another one, there's another one, there's another one, and we never pause and look back at what we did. And again, that goes to being humble, but it also just goes to that sort of hamster wheel mentality and a little bit of like the scarcity mindset of, well, there's just not enough time. We've just got to keep moving forward. And with programs, the whole reason we do them, right, is to have an impact on people. So we need to pause and look back and say, well, what did that program do? Did it change someone's life? Did it meet a need? Did it simply attract a large number of people? Like, what were the outcomes of that program and how are we communicating that to our stakeholders? Not It's not just about getting people to come. It's also letting the people, even those who didn't come, know why it's important that we do it. And as a library someone who worked at a library during massive budget cuts, that was the first thing that we really took a hit on was our programming because we hadn't articulated that well. We focused on program titles and descriptions that we thought were fun or whimsical or might get people in the door. But what we weren't doing was educating our funding stakeholders about why we were doing those programs and how those programs contributed to positive outcomes in the community that were aligned with our funders' priorities. And I think this translates into academic libraries too, right? Because your larger campus or organization has priorities, has outcomes that they are trying to achieve. And so the library needs to be able to say, here's how our collections, services, offerings, programs, staff are contributing to that. And so what I do with my clients as a long-winded way of getting back to it is really working on separating out their key messages so that they're not just churning out content about programs. So like, your foundational key messages about who you are, your service messages, which explain kind of what all your many offerings are. And in some libraries, if you count all the databases, there's hundreds and hundreds of services. So, how do we condense that into manageable chunks so that we can communicate it efficiently? And then there's seasonal messages, which is kind of where I lump in programming because programming, again, it's seasonal, it's always changing. And then fourth, and maybe most importantly, they're impact messages. And that's where we pull in, all right, well, what are your annual stats? How do those align with your strategic plan or your greater outcomes that you're trying to achieve? And then what are those stories of impact that align with those priorities so that you've got like you said, the numbers and the stories, whether that's just something you're communicating on an ongoing basis to build goodwill, which is really important. And then also to have that on hand if and when that crisis does happen and you're worried, that funding might be cut.
No, no, I think that's really great. And I think too that when the in the sort of age of where we don't have as many staff, staff are let go, I think we're doing more with a lot less. And I always talk to people about prioritizing the message. I think that, especially for you with your marketing plans and things that you help them with, the message is important. And I always tell them in adult learning, people don't remember any more than 3 to 5, three maybe. And I remember when I used to be a director, we had three. I just felt like every staff member could say three. And
Mhm,
even when we had programs, I would tell the people in the audience our three things to the point where I felt like I was successful when I heard my community members come in and regurgitate what I was saying. They're like, they're doing this program because their priority one is this. And when you hear people regurgitate like what you
mhm,
are, it not only stopped us from burning out trying to be all things to all people, it
mhm,
helped us figure out like, okay, we might not be able to do this. We're not going to be an expert in this area or that area because our priority focuses are these and are, not that we're not doing everything else, but that way it helped us from just running around like a crazy person trying to
mhm,
be all things to all people and not doing anything very well. But I also think that having your message and being able to repeat it over and over again helps not only
mhm,
for your staff to buy into it, but it also helps your stakeholders kind of also be like, you know, of course they're not doing that because their priority is this, this, this. And I was wondering, like, but that brings in a question for me about when you go in and do marketing plans, like, what is your normal process like of helping
mhm.
people to do that? Because I know it's a little bit different than strategic planning, right? It's a little bit different. So, what is your normal? Could you run through it?
Sure. Yeah, and it is different than strategic planning, but not as different as you would think because I think the cycles are very much the same. It's just the activities and the deliverables that are different. But when I got my accreditation in PR, they taught us the RPIE process, which is research planning, implementation, and evaluation. And any project I do, whether it's rebrand, a strategic plan, a marketing plan, you name it, it's going to have those four elements. They may not be called that, but that's what they are because really anything you do, you can't immediately begin throwing out ideas if you haven't done your research. And so part of that process early on is looking at things like what is your library strategic plan? What are your three things? Who are your stakeholders? And so we map out audiences and even when I teach libraries how to do this themselves because I have like a tutorial on my niche academy that walks people through this process. We always start with audiences because ultimately they're the people that you're trying to build those relationships with. And so you need to know who they are. And I divide them into three categories: internal audiences, external audiences, and funding stakeholders. Because your messaging your core messages are always going to be the same, but your content or your messaging on how you're actually trying to reach those audiences may be a little bit different depending on the audience. Like I always say, internal audiences generally they're like, what do I need to know to do my job well? External audiences are what's the library have for me? How is the library meeting my needs? And then funding stakeholders, they generally want to know why is the library a good investment for me? Whether they're giving a donation, a grant, giving a grant, or public funders, or in the case of an academic library, that could be the budget office or the leadership making decisions on where to allocate funding within the university. So we start by mapping out those audiences and really understanding who they are. And then after that research, and then we usually do like a little bit of an environmental scan. So, like, who are your competitors in the community? Now that we know who your audiences are, can we map your different communication channels that you already have to those audiences and then map the messaging to those audiences? And then figure out how you're going to get the message to them. So it's sort of an iterative process. And then what we try to do is set like a big picture goal, which is like your dream desired outcome for your marketing plan, whether it means, 100% of people in your community have a library card or whatever that might be, a big ambitious goal. And then we have measurable objectives that really go in and focus in on, okay, well, what is it they're really trying to achieve? Like some libraries, they do want to increase program attendance or they want to increase uh, program outcomes. Some they may want to increase, circulation or utilization of different services and offerings. Some may have a fundraising component where they want to increase, donations by a certain amount. So we kind of map out what those are, and those need to align with the strategic plan. The more I think you can align with the library's strategic plan or guiding priorities, the more buy in you're going to get organically. Because the one thing marketers don't have time to do is run around and get buy-in from internal staff. Absolutely. Do I think there should be collaboration? There should be intentional conversations. There should be internal communication meetings, sharing of priorities, all of that. But there just isn't enough time or staff capacity to get buy-in from every single employee. But if your library has done their job right, then your strategic plan already did that. And so if you can map your marketing and communications plan to your strategic plan or whatever your strategic goals and priorities are, then, you can ladder up in that way. So you don't have to start over, if that makes sense.
Definitely makes sense. And that also brings up a question. So for your clients that they have you come in and do the marketing plan,
Mhm.
what advice do you give them for it to not sit in a shelf somewhere, sort of like the
Mhm.
strategic plan, and nobody remembers it afterwards? Nobody like checks on it afterwards until it's like, oh, I think we probably need to look at that again. So how do you get it from that planning phase? We all spend money on the strategic plan, the marketing plan, the assessment plan, the plan, and how do
Mhm.
we get it from sort of ongoing execution?
Yeah, well, one really simple thing I built into my process is I always do a 3-month check in with them after the project officially ends. So that does create a little bit of accountability on both sides to be able to have something to report at that 3 months. And so that's one way to kind of ensure. I mean, the other thing I typically assume is if you're getting your board to allocate money to bring me in, you will need to show something for that. You're not going to be able to get away with just putting it on a shelf. So I also try to create like a consultation report at the end. So in addition to giving them the actual deliverables of like the communications and marketing plan, is to give them a very detailed document that's like, here's the entire process we did and why it wasn't, and the intention behind it. And here's what you got as a result of it, so that they can then take it back to whoever gave them the money or ask them to do this and say, here's what we did. Transparency is very important in libraries too. So I want people to know like your money was well spent and here's everything that came out of it. So typically I don't see a problem with people following through because like I said, if they made the case for the money, they have to show that they used it well. I think the harder part is just the operationalizing it and when they do face a little bit of internal pushback. Like, so for example, when they want to market things other than programs, those programmers can get their feelings hurt. And so sometimes we try to bring them in the very beginning of the process so they understand the bigger picture. So I've even gone so far as like facilitate a session where we had like the head of programming, the head of circulation, the head of IT all in one meeting, and everybody brings their priorities to the meeting. We map them all out and then, give it back to them like, okay, if you were the marketer, how would you prioritize this? And they come to realize like, in the grander context of things, there are many, many things going on beyond just my program, and it's like, okay, well, what would you be willing to not do? Try to get new card holders? Or do you want to not market the fact that we have databases? Do you want to not market the fact that we have ebooks? So just a little bit of that internal alignment can go a long way as well. And sometimes we even make a case for them to hire someone. And that has been successful in the past. Like I've had clients after we go through this process go back and make a case for adding a position.
No, no, I think that's great, and I think your idea of the check-ins, like, every couple of
Mhm.
months, even if they didn't hire you and people are just watching to think, like, "How can we just jumpstart a marketing plan and execution?" That having someone to be able to check in every couple of months, and I love your idea. I think that's fabulous to bring in internal stakeholders because a lot of times we might like, here's the plan, go forth and be merry. And a lot of
Mhm.
people internally who may or may not have been really that invested in the plan itself are part of the execution and really need to kind of have a meeting of the minds with everyone to figure out like how does this make sense within our workflows. So yeah, I
Mhm.
think that's a really, really good idea, especially for people who are on the call right now thinking like, we can't afford her, but we need to like really get this off the ground. We know it's important and but we don't want to spend energy trying to figure things out and nothing happens afterwards. And so I think this is really,
Mhm.
really good advice. So the last question, everybody, before we take questions from the audience, is everybody always wants to know like when does this actually work? So could you
Mhm.
share an example of you working with things and or places that we should look at as good models for marketing done well?
Gosh, wow, put me on the spot here. Yeah, so I can give some examples of like internally where this has worked really well, and that'll give me some time to think about some examples. So I had one client where we really felt very strongly that they were missing their opportunity to communicate with their patrons in their through their ILS because they had roughly 80,000 active borrowers in their ILS, but they were still doing an opt-in e-newsletter and they only had about 8,000 people on that list. And so one of our recommendations was for them to switch to having all their cardholders who've given email addresses receiving their email marketing messages like newsletters and stuff. And to do it thoughtfully by giving those patrons a heads up, letting them know this was a new service they were going to be offering and giving them, all the outs they could possibly need if they didn't want to get this email. But there was still a lot of fear about it. And this was a while ago, but then the pandemic struck. And so because we kind of built that case, I think that kind of eased the tension around this idea. So they went ahead and did flip that switch and they did start emailing all of their customers. And so, they went from about 8,000 to about 80,000 people they were able to reach with marketing messages. And their unsubscribe rate was less than 1%, which generally is the case when I've worked with libraries or even just talked to libraries like at conferences that switch from this opt-in model to this opt-out model where you pretty much, and when I say opt-out model, I mean you allow the patron to opt out. So rather than making the patron take that extra step to opt in, you opt everybody in and then transparently, clearly, ethically, legally let them opt out if they want to. Generally, when libraries switch to that model, the people who opt out is less than 1%. So you could be missing the chance to communicate with, you know, 40% of your patrons or something like that just because you're afraid of that 1%, like, being upset or less than 1%. So sometimes we do have to think about it in that bigger picture way of like, who are we hurting because we're a little bit afraid of someone being upset with us? Like, are we hurting many, many more people just out of the fear of upsetting like a very small number of people? And I talk about that a lot in my first book as well. So you guys can check that out. It's up from ALA Editions if you're interested in kind of learning more about that thought process. So that's one example. Like I said, some other examples. People have actually sometimes come up to me when I give a talk at a conference and they're like, oh, yeah, I read your book and I did everything. And now we hired a new person. And I'm like, wait, come back. Tell me more. And I don't always get their contact information, but yeah, we've definitely had people after we made a case, they were able to hire someone. We've also done some work on like internal communications and what I like to call self-service options, templates, letting libraries, be able to offer the staff, especially the programming staff, some tools that they can use on their own to market their programs so they don't feel like something's being taken away necessarily just because the marketing department's going to be focusing on some other things, but rather that they are being empowered to use some of these tools because the tools have gotten so good like Canva and things like that. So sometimes we'll even do like a training on like, here's how to take a Canva template and make sure it's in your brand. Boom, done, so that you don't have to have like a graphic designer or a professional marketer doing all that work just to make a flyer that maybe 10 people will see. So those are some other examples of success stories. And now I'm trying to think back. Well, one really great example was Hawaii. So I had the good fortune of working with Hawaii State Public Library System. And on its surface, it was a branding project, but it really was what I called a community engagement project. They had done an LSTA survey and found that, most residents of the state didn't know what the library had to offer. And they knew they had not changed the library's brand since the 90s. And even then, it wasn't really a brand, it was just a library card design. And they'd been using that as their logo for decades. So we started again with research, did a big community engagement effort. They were actually given money by their legislature to spend on this effort. And so we created a new brand, but we also created an awareness campaign. And we launched the new look, as we called it, in conjunction with summer reading. So they saw a significant percentage of summer reading. I don't have the stats right in front of me, but I did do a case study that's on my website that has the actual numbers. But they saw a big increase in summer reading registration. They saw a big increase in people coming to get new library cards. And they saw a huge increase in their Instagram engagement, just like a phenomenal amount of increase there. And of course, Instagram engagement isn't the outcome, but it certainly is a way to help raise awareness to get to the outcome you want, which is more people using the library. So that was a really great example where we saw a lot of really positive, measurable results, and we kind of built that in. I always build measurement into those plans. Sometimes it's hard to get my clients to follow up and tell me what the numbers actually were
No,
after
no,
after
totally
that
get it.
month check-in.
No, I was laughing when you said Instagram engagement because it reminded me, I think LA Public, is it LA Public, who
Yes,
has
they
their
are one of
huge
my favorites.
Instagram page, and it was actually my guy who, like, sent it to me. It was like, "Oh my gosh, I don't know if you knew this. There's a
Mhm,
public library." He's not a librarian, he's actually a designer. I mean, found it
mhm.
somewhere, follows them, and sends me these things all the time, and we're not nowhere near LA, but it's just
Yeah,
interesting that just random people from out of nowhere are following LA just because of
mhm.
their strong Instagram content. So yeah, it made me I smile when I think of that because he's like, "Oh, you gotta follow them." And it was just exciting to see someone who's not a librarian be that excited about
Definitely.
content. Oh, that was really
Yeah,
cool.
and, they are not a former client of mine, I wish, but LA Public Library, they do a great job on social media, and I'm also on the board for the Library Marketing and Communications Conference. I don't get paid for that, but so I can say that I strongly endorse the conference, and we have a lot of content for academic libraries, so check it out. It's an annual conference in November, and we've had him do a keynote, the LA Library social media guy, Keith has done a keynote at the conference, and he's also done webinars for us in the past. So they're doing great work. He has a team. He's fortunate enough to have a team, but they really stretch their capacity amazingly. I do have a list of like libraries to follow on social media that I could share with you after the fact. I think I've pulled this for quite a few different webinars, so I think I have it handy. I can send it to you.
Yeah, I'll put that onto the YouTube page under your stuff and
Mhm.
your website and stuff like that for people to follow and then follow you on Facebook. I think I'll have all of that information for you as well.
Yeah.
And I love before I get to the questions, make sure you put it in the box. But before I get to the questions, I just wanted to say that opt in, opt out is fabulous. Really think about that. We did that for my library. We just opened it up to everybody, and we didn't have that many people who opt out at all. And it really, really did help us sort of increase our engagement. And so many people who were like, I love your content, or we love this or that, who we probably would have never gotten them to opt in. So I think that
Mhm.
advice was spot on. I think it's very, very good advice.
Yeah, I've started telling libraries frame it as a public service. Emailing your patrons the things that they could do with their library card or with their at their public library is really a public service. You're doing a public good. You're helping them become aware of things they weren't aware of, and that's going to help them save money. It's going to improve their lives. It's going to help their families, whatever. And conversely, not telling them is actually not in the public interest. So it could actually be hurting your patrons because they're not getting to know all the great stuff. And I've actually had people say that to me in conversations like, I'm disappointed that I don't get emails from my library. So I think we do have those few vocal patrons that we've heard, and that can kind of spook us a little bit like, oh, we don't want to upset anybody. That one lady yelled at me 5 years ago, so I never want to do that again. When in reality, it's such a tiny, tiny, maybe vocal, but tiny, tiny minority of people who don't want that. Most people want it because it's a public good.
Right. No, yeah, I mean, you had a few people who were like, "I wanna unsubscribe," and okay, cool, no worries
Mhm.
at all, but it was very, very few and far between. But the first question that we have here is, can you describe some ways that you market a library? We have a opt-in newsletter and a Facebook page. We are
Mhm.
a new in-school public library. We have regulars, but we love to reach more people. We rely on the school taxpayers to fund our library.
Interesting. So obviously, I don't know enough about your library structure to give like super specific recommendations, but when it comes to public library school partnerships, I think the best ones are the ones that have communication built into the partnership. So, for example, my former library, there's a very common thing I think nowadays where public libraries issue student library cards to all the students in the public schools usually through their student ID number. So to reiterate, the students don't have to apply for a card. There isn't like a library card drive where parents had to fill anything out. It's just an automatically opted in library card that they receive. And again, they don't have to use it, but they can. What we very quickly realized is we had no way to reach these students except through the teachers, which required having very intentional relationships. So going back to that idea of building relationships with your audiences, the school administrators are an audience, the teachers are an audience, the students are an audience, their parents are an audience. And then the other thing we did was try to align with their internal communication tools. So the school we worked with at the time used a software called Peach Jar that allowed them to send digital flyers out to the families. And so part of our agreement with them was that once a month they would let us do a library peach jars. And we had a content calendar for our whole library. And so each month we'd highlight a different resource, right, that the students could use, plus some other like benefits of their student cards, which we called one access cards. And then also there were relationships at multiple levels. So I had the relationship with the communications guy at the school, but also our head of programming had a relationship with the media specialists and the educators so that they would build the cards into their curriculum. Again, relationships are a really great way to market a library, especially if you don't have a lot of dollars to buy advertising or something. That said, if you have a Facebook page, and Meta keeps changing the rules, but generally speaking, with a B2C organization, meaning business to consumer marketing, something as simple as a Facebook boost could really get your content to a broader audience. So the people who follow you on Facebook, they probably already know what your library has to offer, at least one or two things. But if you want to reach beyond that, you can do things like a $20 Facebook boost and really try to go in and target those audiences for whom that would resonate. And I remember testing this out at my library, with just some simple like, okay, it's at this branch. So we're going to like draw a little circle around that branch and geo target that group. And you can do that with things like Google Ads too. And Google Ads actually have these Google Ad grants that libraries, if there is a nonprofit entity associated with that library, like a Friends, you can apply and get those for free. And again, because libraries have the beauty of the geography, you can get more bang for your buck because you're able to geo target down. So then you can really saturate that market. Like if you were trying to market to all of the US, a $20 Facebook boost would do you no good. But when you're just trying to reach a county or a city or a town or a campus, using those tools, you can really hone in on that audience. Another place I think people are already gathered and looking for this kind of content is Nextdoor. So I often recommend libraries check out Nextdoor, and it could be that your local municipality already has a Nextdoor account. Again, if you're a public library, if you're an academic library, I don't know so much that Nextdoor would be the right thing, but I think relationships. When I've worked with academic libraries, it seems like having relationships with those other internal departments who have your audience, who have a connection with your audience is a really good way to do it. So we usually with academic libraries will map out by audience, what's the channel for reaching them, and then who do you need to partner with to use that channel. So if it's student services, if it's, faculty within a specific school or something like that, who's that? What is that person's name? What are their deadlines? Like getting pretty specific about it because it really is about those relationships so you don't miss those opportunities.
Thank you. So the next question is I can answer a little bit of it, but I'd love to get your feedback too. It says, I liked your comment about libraries not being able to do everything for all people and needing to prioritize. In your
Mhm.
experience, what are some ways to communicate when programs, services do go away, that there is a purpose to that? And I would say for me, because and we did just narrow things down to 3, and there was some things that we had to let go that
Mhm.
was fan favorites, as we would say. One thing that was fan favorites, it took a lot of resources to keep it up, and it was a holiday programming. It was a very specific holiday programming that we used to do that we just didn't have the resources to do. And so when we explained and the audience, I mean, the people we were talking to knew our priorities and stuff, and we explained about, our staffing and everything about that. That actually that solution in the moment, because we were so clear on what we were doing and why we were doing it, that it was they came back as a sorority and decided to do it on their own as part of our
Mhm.
friends group. And we still helped out, but we didn't have to put as much energy into it as we would have done if we were taking it on ourselves. But they were like, we completely understand. We think this is important. So we want to put our money where our mouth is. And so we had some programs that were not part of the priority list that we had community people come in and support, which was great for us. It was more buy-in, but it freed up a lot less resources on our end.
Yeah, I've seen that too. In fact, that was in the back of my mind before you started talking was this idea of like sometimes the friends or volunteers can take over a program. And like, for example, one program I think that's really popular are like knitting and crochet like groups that sit and meet. You don't really need a trained librarian to do that. You could have certainly a library person who's the liaison for that and maybe sets, some parameters around it, but you could absolutely have that run by a trusted, volunteer or groups of volunteers, and when I would see those kind of programs in the past, usually there was a staff person who really liked crocheting. So it was like they in their mind, it was like a win-win, like, oh, I get to do my favorite hobby, but it's also under the auspices of serving the public. And that sometimes can be a little hard to let go of too, but it may in fact be that for a time, your time is better spent on something else and letting that volunteer or friends group take that over. But yeah, and then just to the point of like when things do have to go away or get focused, having those internal talking points is really important. And so that's where I get back to the 3 buckets of audiences. Those internal audiences want to know, what do I need to know to get my job done? They may also want talking points in case a patron comes in and is like upset that something's going away, right? My former library, when we went through our budget cuts, we had done this really popular festival called the Novello Festival of Reading for years and years. And we'd bring in really big authors. I mean, we literally spent like $80,000 on one author one time. And we actually got a bad headline for that, needless to say. After the budget cuts, we decided to do away with Novello because a lot of people thought it was a fundraiser, but it was actually a fund spender. And we had always done it as our gift to the community, but that gift cost a lot of dollars. And so the idea was, how can we rethink this rather than just trying to keep it or have it limp along at a lower and lower budget? Why don't we just like stop doing this thing and come up with something better that meets the current day needs of our libraries and also maybe is a fundraiser. And now they have this wonderful event called Verse and Vino, and they bring in New York Times bestselling authors for free. They don't even charge a speaking fee. And that's something done under the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library Foundation now. If we had not been brave enough to stop Novello, and again, it's not like stopping it made all the wonderful years we did it go away. We can still reflect back. It's like back to that thing about it's not always about what's coming. We can also pause and reflect back. So it's not like we're taking that away. It still had been 2 decades of wonderful author visits and memories and things, but also being brave enough to stop doing that and saying, you know what, this is no longer achieving the purpose it was meant to. So what can we do? And that allowed them to come up with this really wonderful event that not only brings these authors in, but it attracts thousands of people who are hearing positive messaging about the library and being inspired to donate too. So it's great.
No, no, I think that that's, like, brilliant and perfect because I do think a lot of times it is that time of, like, "We're just gonna get rid of this program," but it is that time of reflection about how did that program or that service serve us? What did we learn from it? How can we adapt it in your case of novella? And I'm like, $80,000 an author, I'm like, "Oh my gosh." And so but, how can you be able to revamp it? But I think listening to your message, when somebody did come back and say that you have not just we just got rid of it, but it was more
Mhm,
of a it served us well. We really enjoyed it. This is what happened, so this is where we're going. 9
mhm,
times out of 10 people understand that messaging. It's just how can we be more clear about why we're doing things? And I think I find a lot of times people are okay with it if you have clear messaging. It goes back to what you were saying in the very beginning. How can we make sure we have the clear messaging so we are communicating to our stakeholders? Then I'm like, oh, okay. I'm not 100% happy, but it makes sense to me. I
mhm.
understand why this has to be done. So
Yeah.
the next question here is, what are some messages for explaining the difference between a library and bookstore, or messages that help explain that libraries, bookstores are partners more than competitors?
Yeah, I think that that's a wonderful question. I mean, I think, I love this idea of framing it around libraries and bookstores are partners, right? Not competitors, because ultimately they're both part of the same, or they're both sort of tapped into the industry of books, right? Getting books out, supporting authors, supporting reading, helping build a more, informed world, right? But by people having access to the books and the information and the resources and things that they need. So if you think at a very high level about the mission, there is a lot of alignment between libraries and, say, bookstores. But I think with libraries, there's so much that libraries offer that is different than bookstores, that is additive or complementary. That I don't think it's that difficult to explain the difference. All you have to do is look at a library's website and see, the vast array of offerings like technology, like free Wi-Fi, like digital hotspot lending and laptop lending and libraries of things and all these things. And the fact that of course we're not really charging. I mean, maybe we will charge a nominal fee here or there or a fine. But yeah, so I think that's really I think wrapping your arms around what are your service messages is really important. So I mentioned those four types of messages. You've got your foundational, your service, your seasonal, and your impact. When it comes to the service messages, as I said, there's so many services. If you tried to list them, you would not be able to get through the list without needing a sip of water. But how can you condense those down into actual messages like the library is a safe place, or the library is a reliable source of free access to technology and the skills to use it, for example. I'm just spitballing here, but and then under that, you can list we have computers, we have Wi Fi, we have laptops, we have this, we have that, we have that. But really boiling it down to those key messages is really important. The library has access to rich collections, both fiction and nonfiction, and, digital and print formats to meet every need. That could be like a larger message. And then under that, you could list we have Overdrive, we have Libby, we have print books, we have foreign language collections, we have this and this and this. So, yeah, I think the minute that once you take that time and sit down and condense and figure out what those service messages are, it becomes much easier to differentiate yourself between like a bookstore. And similar with those foundational messages, which really start with your mission and vision and why you exist in the first place. And there may be some overlap with that bookstore, and you can highlight where your mission and vision align and your values overlap, and then also what makes you unique.
So it looks like that's all the questions we have in our box, but I just wanted to, before we go, to make sure that you know that there is many ways that you can connect with our presenter, ALA Editions. She already has a book there. She's got another book coming out with it, not with ALA, but with other things. I will put her website onto the YouTube page so you can click on that. You can also join her Facebook. I'm one of your, I think I've joined. So you can join through Facebook, or just reach out to her directly if you have any follow-up or you want to work with her directly. But we want to thank you so much for coming. For everybody else, like I said, in about 2 business days, I should have everything posted onto the YouTube page.
Mhm.
Please forward it to anybody. There was a lot of really rich information that was there to anybody who would benefit from the message. Other than that,
Mhm.
I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I will see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Alrighty. And I will send you that list of social media recommendations.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Do you need anything else from me?
Nope, that's it. Have a great day.
Thank you. Talk to you next week.
Okay.